This episode is brought to you by Craig James Financial Services. When it comes to retirement saving and financial planning, Craig James Financial has been top of the table for over a decade. To learn how to make your hard-earned money last a lifetime, visit www.craigjamesfinancial.com today. Securities offered through United Planners, member FINRA, SIPC.
I don't know, it may just be me, but I really got a feeling like we could catch fire and have a great season, huh? Now who's with me?
Woo! The electric in the air!
Sometimes it may be good, sometimes it may be
The Cleats First, Logic Second Football Podcast with your hosts, Alexander Lauber and Phil Almodovar.
Welcome back, one and all, to the Cleats First, Logic Second Football Podcast. Today, Phil and I will be discussing the idea of taking over a sleeping giant, and if it's a good long-term investment as far as not only financial, but in terms of bringing silverware back to a once storied club. Phil, it's a really interesting prospect. We've seen pretty much throughout this season one former sleeping giant who is fairly decorated, but also one of the most storied clubs in terms of its founding date. Both taken over in both very interesting deals.
Yes, Alex, and we're going to go through both of them today, all about them. Is the takeover worth it? And of course, go into, lastly, some of our own ideas of clubs who could be taken over this season or miles in the future, and who would be the most suitable there. So, Alex, let's jump right into it and go straight into the first big takeover that hit the news. And this takeover didn't exactly hit the news because of the storied club. It was more because of who ended up taking over. It was really a shock to see Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney go in for a football club. Two American celebrities, Ryan Reynolds, of course, a famed actor, Rob McElhenney, the creator of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, and also an actor on that show as well, both pooling their assets to help out a struggling Wrexham side. Wrexham, of course, being located in Wales, for all of you who do not know. They do play in the English Football Association. They have ever since their inception. They were never really a esteemed club. They were always bouncing around in their early days between the top two divisions in England. Since, of course, have faltered mightily to the point where now they're currently in the 5th tier of England. That's right. The third oldest club, Wrexham, is in the entire world. Currently in the 5th tier of England, mostly due to financial troubles. And that's where we get into this story, Alex. Wrexham, since 2011, for almost a decade, was fan-owned. This proved to not help the team's financial woes in any way, shape, or form. So what happens, but of all people, Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney, like I said, approached club executives outright to buy the club, and they said they wanted 100% ownership. Of course, if this happens and the team is owned by shareholders, the shareholders must vote for the takeover. And surprisingly enough, 98% of the club's shareholders approved of the American takeover. 98%. And that could really more or less be contributed to, okay, we need money, we'll take the money. Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney paid a grand total of only £2 million for the club. And Alex, if you ask yourself, well, why did they do this? Ryan Reynolds, in a press conference after buying the club, well, co-buying, I should say, said to the media that he wants to make Wrexham a global force. He wants to get them back to their former glory and then some. Of course, Rob McElhenney said he loves the passion of the fans. He loves the history that Wrexham has, and for a very small investment would love to be a part of it. Now, in terms of the real reason that Rob and Ryan both bought the club, Now, yes, you could say as much as you want about fan passion and about history, but it seems like the two television stars want to turn Wrexham's story into a documentary to appear on most likely Netflix. This, of course, would only benefit the club in the end, as club captain Sean Pearson articulated to the media after the acquisition that if the club were to appear in a Netflix documentary, the club would earn hundreds of thousands of pounds for doing so, which is a lot more than what they have now. Alex, what a story.
Yeah, definitely an interesting takeover story. Like you said, two Hollywood big names coming out of the blue seemingly to take over what really is a club that's fallen under the radar in Wrexham, like you said, in the 5th division. They've seen this massive fall from grace and, this long stint of being in the shadows, and this is finally an opportunity for them to continue to develop their identity and really reestablish themselves as a club in England. I don't think it's realistic to expect them to skyrocket up, and like you said, if this really does turn out to just be a reinvestment for the fact of being able to create the documentary and get publicity around it, so be it. But with the potential upside of being able to redevelop a club, it'll be interesting to see how that comes about. Now, one of the other big takeovers in English football that we've seen so far drag on for pretty much, a little bit over a year now, has been that of the sleeping giant, that is Sunderland AFC. For those of you who don't know, Sunderland is a 6-time top flight winner, all part in 1936, so before it was known as the Premier League. They're 2-time FA Cup winners, 2-time Charity Shield winners, and they've really been promoted and relegated a number of times, but for the longest of time, they were a mid to lower table club in the Premier League. So, to talk about the ownership situation, it's changed a number of times really since 2006. In 2006, Drummaville Consortium, which is an Irish and English businessmen-led group ran by former player Niall Quinn. That group took over the club in 2006, but in 2009 sold it over to Irish-American businessman Ellis Short. And after jumping again around between promotion and relegation a little bit in that period, in 2018, lifelong fan Stuart Donaldson purchased the club. So Donaldson promised Sunderland fans the world and that they would wake a sleeping giant, but in turn really fell miles short after suffering consecutive relegations, first from the Premier League, then from the Championship down into League One and nulling around in League One ever since. If you look at this critically, Donaldson tried to take every aspect of the business into this new industry that he had no experience in on his shoulders, and unfortunately wasn't able to meet his own high expectations. It seemed like he was too big for his britches to a degree, but it was great to see the passion that he showed, and I definitely suggest watching the Sunderland Till I Die documentary on Netflix. There are 2 seasons there. Their season in the Championship and their first season down in League One. Very interesting show and very interesting turn of events to see that club's fall from grace. Again, unfortunate to see it happen to them, and for the fans who are so loyal and so dedicated to that club. You see in the documentary Sunderland in the town there. Supporting the football club is like a religion, and even in church, they'll pray for the club to win and they'll pray for the club to do good. It's part of their daily life there. And they've all really been struggling again throughout these last few tough years. So Donaldson finally came to the realization that he wasn't able to do it anymore and had been shopping around the team for a little bit until in February, finally, the EFL approved Sunderland's takeover by 23-year-old Frenchman Kyril Louis-Dreyfus, who is the son of the late billionaire Robert Louis-Dreyfus, who is a former owner of Marseille. Kyril was around the club when his father owned it and had some experience there, granted he was much younger at the time. Now, Sunderland are currently hovering around a playoff spot in League One, but realistically do need to keep expectations realistic and not expect something like a double promotion initially off the bat, because even Louis-Dreyfus has said that the club is in need of a complete rebuild after continuous asset stripping. So there is, I think, though, for fans, a legitimate hope at success here. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, they don't deserve to be let down again. So there will be a large amount of pressure on the new ownership group. Now, it's more realistic to take things season by season. This will be a long process. And it seems like ownership has acknowledged that it'll be a long process. So it'll definitely be interesting to see if Sunderland can ultimately reach their end goal and make it back up to the Premier League in the next few years.
Absolutely, Alex. And it's going to be interesting what Louis-Dreyfus can do to continue the rebuild started by Donaldson. As seen in the documentary, Donaldson really took strides to try to modernize Sunderland in the game through appearance and infrastructure. Got a little bit farther with appearance than he did with infrastructure, as we saw in the documentary. He wasn't exactly able to strip assets, really wasn't able to get the balance sheet, income statement, financial side, as well as the business side of things back on track to a more reasonable state now that Sunderland are in League One and not in the Premier League. We'll see if Louis Dreyfus is more successful in doing that in order to help turn the club around, which gets us into the conversation, Alex, of is this worth it? And we can look at through either perspective or just in general, Alex. What's your take on this? Is it worth it for someone with the money, with the assets available to do this?
Well, look, it's really conditional and it determines from club to club. If we look at the two examples that we discussed, if you look at a feasibility I look at it as a feasibility from two ends. One, the potential to make money, and two, the potential to have success and cash in on a current fan base. If I look at the two clubs, they're not direct comparisons, but Sunderland does have a very, very loyal fan base. A few years ago, they were averaging about 47,000 fans in attendance at the Stadium of Light. And even while they were in League One, they were still hovering around the 40,000 mark. So there is definitely a fan base that, if you look at it from the ownership perspective and the ability to make money, there definitely is money to be made with a club like Sunderland. The push for silverware is more realistic. And with the history, if you can make it back up to the Premier League, I think you'll have a fair amount of draw. When I look at the Wrexham situation, it's really interesting. I think it's worth it for Reynolds and McElhenney to put in, a relatively moderate amount of their net worth into investing in this club. It gets them attention, it gets the club attention, their attachment and just their names being attached to it have enough value that it'll definitely add a huge hype around the club and, even keeping things realistic that they are a 5th division team. There is, relatively speaking, potential to be made because if you look at it as an investment standpoint, between the documentary, between possible promotions from the 5th division to the 4th division to the 3rd division, I don't know how high realistically you can expect Wrexham to move, and we don't know how ambitious Reynolds and McElhenney will be in terms of their investment into the clubs, into players, into coaching, into management, what have you. But I think it really is worth investing into a club if there is a history there, if there's a fan base to capitalize on that's existing, and even the possibility to make it more of a global force. So Phil, where do you stand on this?
Alex, you bring up some great points, and I love the prospect of investing in a team with a lot of history, but it doesn't matter the history, the fan base, as much for me as the means as the owner. If you have the means in place to profit from this event, from owning this club, then it's worth it. Now, I'm going to go straight into Wrexham first, because I think Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney have the means to profit from this club. And it's an interesting situation for Wrexham. They're currently in the 5th tier, the National League of the 5th tier. Now, quick English football tier lesson. The 5th tier is broken up into 3 separate divisions. Each separate division has the same number of clubs. Only one club from those 3 total divisions could go up to League 2 to the EFL. Now, that is a very, very tough situation that Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney are put in, that they have to be the best out of a number of teams to even have the chance of making it up to League Two. However, I think they have the means to do it. If this documentary does get off the ground, they'll have much more money to spend than any other team down there in the fifth tier. They also have the means of already having a large attendance record for a fifth tier side. Last season, before the COVID-19 pandemic, in the 2018-2019 season, before anything happened that affected attendance in England, Wrexham was averaging its highest attendance numbers in the past 4 years, averaging just over 5,000 fans per home match. That may not sound like a lot, but for a fifth tier semi-pro considered team, that's huge. And once you make that jump, if you have the means, which I think they both do, if you're able to make that jump from the National League to League Two, you're talking about $0 and 0 cents, £0 in TV broadcast revenue to just over £7 million in TV broadcast revenue in League Two. And of course, that's barring inflation. It could be higher next year than it is this year. But in this year, £7 million per club in League Two. That is a huge, huge difference from where they are now in the National League. That is a huge influx of money, just apart from what they'll be getting if they continue the documentary on from there, which I definitely think it will be continued if they get promoted. But it's huge that they have the means there. Sunderland is a little bit more of a murkier situation. I think Louis-Dreyfus has the means in the fact that he has the capital. He has the money to be able to say, well, let me get myself invested in this. Let's get this club where Donaldson wanted to be, in the fact that let's get a positive number in our balance sheets, on our income statements for the year, something that we haven't seen at Sunderland in years. Ever since Sunderland were dropped from the Prem, they've had a loss on their income statement every single year. And that's because they're having to pay these high utility numbers, these high numbers to maintain their facilities that are Premier League grade. And obviously, when you're paying those figures in the Championship in League One, it doesn't work. You're losing money. So Donaldson really started the process of getting that infrastructure together in the way that a League One team can operate. And now I think Louis-Dreyfus could either get that into a much better situation, or he himself garner the fact that he could pump money into the team to make it a positive situation for them. I think both teams have the means, both owners have the means to get these teams back on track, which is the key to any ownership in any sport, especially football.
Very true. It'll definitely be interesting to see how both teams can do. Is promotion necessarily realistic for this season? I don't know. We'll definitely see how that situation plays out. So on from there, Phil, why don't we move over to a couple of candidates who are prime and ready for a takeover. We'll look at 3 prospective ones that you'll present to us, and then I will talk about 2 that are currently in the works. One much further along than the other, but both seem to just be ideas at the interim. So Phil, why don't you take us to a different perspective? Let's look at a couple of clubs and prospective owners who could really help boost these English clubs.
Yeah, Alex, and mine are kind of pipe dreams, like you'd love to see it. And Alex, yours obviously have more ground, more backing to it. But let's go first into the fun ones that I wanted to bring up because I just thought it'd be cool to see. First of all, Northampton Town and Shaquille O'Neal. Shaquille O'Neal, former NBA superstar, obviously has a ton of money. The internet says that his net worth is just over about 400 million US dollars. Northampton Town could be bought for a few £1,000,000 at the moment. Currently in League One, probably going to be relegated back to League Two this season. They haven't done well in League One this season. Now, Shaquille O'Neal revealed last year when Northampton Town were going to be promoted in a promotion battle that he was a huge Northampton Town supporter, which led to me speculating on why he was. Apparently, the reason he is because Shaquille O'Neal owns a radio station with the club's chairman, which is interesting, which made him an avid fan. He's been watching the club ever since, meeting the chairman of the club. And if chairman Kelvin Thomas ever sold, it would be cool to see Shaq step in and own a English football club. That would make for a fun documentary.
Yeah, that would definitely make for some interesting television, like you said. Interesting to see how he could take his basketball mind, how he could take his business savvy that he's developed since retiring from the NBA, but being able to tie that into another sport that he's passionate about, but also not coming from a complete business background. It would definitely be an interesting takeover to see. So how about your second potential takeover, Phil?
So next, and less likely, is Daniel Day-Lewis. Did you know that he's a lifelong Millwall supporter? Daniel Day-Lewis, during a speech at an awards ceremony, went off on a random tangent about how he is an avid Millwall supporter and depicted his boyhood days rooting for the club amongst avid club supporters during Millwall's glory days. Since Millwall haven't been as up to par as they normally are, they are in the championship, so they do have some esteem. They would cost some money to buy, which Daniel Day-Lewis, not sure he has that kind of money, but it would be cool to see an avid fan and celebrity who's been a fan for his entire life buy his boyhood club. Would be fun to see. And if we want to go into the last takeover that I have, and by far the least likely to happen, Sir Patrick Stewart. Yes, the Sir Patrick Stewart from Star Trek. Yes, the Sir Patrick Stewart from the X-Men. Did you know that he has been adoring the play of Huddersfield Town for the past decade? Sir Patrick Stewart has said that he's not himself from Huddersfield, nor has he really ever been an avid football fan. But if he were to choose a club, it would be Huddersfield Town, just because of Huddersfield's, quote, rich history. And I think, once again, that history aspect is really cool in the fact that a celebrity notices a team's history, notice what a team can bring to the table. Now, Sir Patrick Stewart definitely does not have the money to buy Huddersfield Town. Huddersfield Town are an esteemed club. They have been in the Premier League in the past decade. However, it would be cool to see Sir Patrick Stewart owning Huddersfield Town. Alex, let's get into what you have to say. Let's get into the other big takeovers that could very much be realities in the coming seasons.
Yeah, when we look at some of the takeovers that really could happen and are quite possible and viable, we look up to the top flight of English football. If you look at, we'll start with the one that's currently on and off and seems to have been backburnered for the time. We'll talk about the Newcastle situation. So Newcastle United, as we know, 4 league titles to their name, 6 FA Cups, and a Charity Shield. They've been undergoing some tough times lately. With Newcastle United, the fans are highly dedicated there. Unfortunately, though, you have to feel for them because Mike Ashley, the current owner, seems to not be invested into the club. He's been shopping the club around for the last couple of years, but he hasn't taken any bids that have came his way. And at the same time, he hasn't invested money into it. Until last summer, when Saudi Arabia's public investment fund of all ownership groups came in and made a bid for the club that he accepted. We'll just go into the breakdown there. So basically what happened there is they made the move for Newcastle. They offered a bid. It was accepted. However, the Premier League did not pass this or did not approve of this, as well as when the ownership group ran into more complications with their owners and directors' test, the Saudi Arabian Public Investment Fund ultimately decided to walk away. However, they have said that they would be interested in making another bid for the club if the Premier League does accept this takeover. And Phil, the scary thing about this investment is really that this can be Man City to a whole nother level, because Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund obviously has a lot more capital to work with. And rumors had came out that they had planned to invest £250 million over a 5-year period directly into the club. And it can be assumed the majority of that would be into players. So this team would have a complete facelift, and we would see essentially another Man City, which, if this takeover does go over, I'm 100% sure we'll do another episode and discuss the real implications of this, because if this takeover happens, it'll turn the top flight into a real spending frenzy, and it's going to seem like more and more you're going to have to pay to play and pay to win when it comes to having long-term success in the Premier League.
Yeah, Alex, Newcastle are a very interesting prospect. And of course, as a fan of the sport, I would love to see it happen. Newcastle, of course, had its heyday back in the 20th century when you saw players like Alan Shearer and others grace the field for Newcastle. And for the Magpies, it just hasn't been the same since. Bouncing up and down from the Premier League in the 21st century, it just hasn't been the same fate, hasn't been the same Newcastle that some of these fans had grown to love back in the day. And to see the prospect of that big giant Newcastle that won 4 league titles and 6 FA Cups possibly coming back is really exciting for fans of the club.
Yeah, definitely. And it'll be interesting to see they're right in the relegation battle this season. And with Fulham really on the rise, it's going to be a tight one for that 18th place and the team that ends up getting relegated to the championship. It'll be a tough battle. It'll be interesting to see if Newcastle can come out of that fight unscathed. Now, Newcastle, like we had mentioned, has really been a mid to lower table team over the last, mostly throughout the 21st century. However, if we look at a giant in English football, undeniably one of the top 3 biggest teams in terms of international appeal, international fan bases, international outreach, but also one of the most decorated English football teams who have been on a lull as of late. We can look over to Phil and my club, Arsenal. So, as we all know, 13 league titles to their name, including the only undefeated season in Premier League history or in English football history. A record 14 FA Cups, 2 League Cups, 16 Community Shields, a League Centennial Trophy, the European Cup Winners' Cup, and 1 Intercities Fairs Cup. Now, I really don't think that when we talk about takeovers, it seems like a lot of these teams are teams that have been in turmoil or teams that have been constantly on the decline. And yes, we have seen a decline in the silverware, really, that Arsenal's walking away with compared to what it's been in the past. It seems like they've mostly been stuck in this roundabout where things are pretty much staying the status quo, and based off of the current ownership group, they're forced into being a self-sustaining ecosystem and it's self-sustaining entity. So what that means is basically most of the income that they're making is getting poured straight back into the team, and ownership isn't really putting in any of their own assets into investing in the club, investing in players, what have you. It's pretty much based off of a set budget, based off of the money that Arsenal is walking away with each season. A possible takeover that's been discussed that could really help push Arsenal to the next level is that by Nigerian business magnate Aliko Dangote, who has a current net worth of $17.8 billion, Arsenal Football Club believed to be valued at around £2 billion. That's the number to seemingly get the job done, to purchase it. Now, when you look at Dangote is another lifelong fan of Arsenal Football Club. However, if you compare it to Stuart Donaldson, much more financial assets to his name, but someone who's used to managing many projects at one time. There were talks last summer when he was interviewed about it. He said he wanted to hold off onto 2021 because he had several $1 billion worth of projects ongoing, and he wanted those to finish off with before he looked at his next task, which to him would be taking over the club that he adores. Now, I think that Dangote taking over Arsenal Football Club would really help kick the club up a level, back to being a European powerhouse on the pitch, not just an influence and not just an outreach. And he seems dedicated enough to prioritize winning silverware whether domestic or continental, and seem savvy enough to put in the money that it'll cost to do so, because at the end of the day, if you're ending in the region where Arsenal's been ending the last 10 or 15 years, what have you, you're still making money, but you're making even more money if you're going far in Europe and if you're going far in the league. So it will be definitely interesting to see if that takeover happens. Big things if that takeover happens too. It'll be interesting to see if that would help Arsenal jump to the next level and really return to being that international powerhouse that we know them to be.
Yes, Alex, two very interesting candidates there that could actually happen. Dangote, I'd love to see. Of course, I feel like all Arsenal supporters would love to see lifelong fan Aliko Dangote take over the club, a man who can multitask other than current owners right now at the club. But we won't get into that. Great conversation today, Alex, about is it worth it to take over a storied club? And I feel like we both alluded to the fact that if you could get the club back on track, if you could actually profit from it, of course it's a great idea. And I'd love to see how things go in the future. And if these two takeovers that we talked about today open the door for possibly more in the future.
Yeah, Phil, it'll definitely be interesting. And like we said, if a takeover like Newcastle or like Arsenal comes about, those will definitely be discussions to be had. We'll even look to explore other European countries. But that's it for this week. Thank you guys again so very much for listening. Have a great week.
And remember, meat first, soccer second.